What's going on? My name is Dustin. Thanks for tuning in. Today, what I want to do is I want to go over something really basic. I want to go over how to just give basic movement in Unity for a player. So what I did is I went ahead and I set up this ground object, and I set up this capsule to sit on top of it to kind of act as our player. So um, what I did is on the player, I went and added this rigid body component. What that's gonna do is if we drag our player above our ground here, it's basically just gonna add physics to our, our object. So if I hit play, you'll notice that he just kind of falls down to the ground. That's set as a default with using gravity, which is just a little checkbox right here. If I were to uncheck it, um, you'll notice that the player no longer falls to the ground. He just kind of stays in his position. So I'm going to use gravity for this. So let's keep that checked. We could also change a lot of different aspects of it as well and how it uses physics. We can change the mass of it. The drag is basically how, for the most part, how much friction it has against other objects and how hard it's going to move. If it's kinematic, it's going to be basically static in the world. It's not going to move anywhere, and you're saying, I'm going to move this strictly with script, which we could do, but we're not going to do that today. Collision detection, whether it's interpolate or not. I also froze the rotation on it on the X, Y, and Z. That way it doesn't fall over. We can't necessarily turn it, but we're not doing that in this tutorial here, so I'm just checked all three of them. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a component to this. When we do it, I'm going to click New Script, and I'm going to call this script Movement, and it'll go ahead and add that component to our player. And if we just double click Movement, it'll open up in Visual Studio, or if you have MonoDevelop, it'll open up in MonoDevelop. But anyways, basically what I want to do here is in our update function, we are going to create a couple of float variables to use. We're going to say float horizontal, and we're going to say that that float is equal to input dot get axis, and the axis we want to get is horizontal. So what this is doing here, so we're declaring a float variable here, which is basically like any number that you can use, whether it's a whole number or a decimal. It's gonna store that number as a variable. We're naming the variable horizontal because it's going to be the direction that we're going to be moving. It's just easier for me to know what it's for. Input.getAxis, what that's in reference to is if we go back into Unity, we can go to Edit and Project Settings, and in our project settings we have this input section here. That's where it is pulling that information when we type in input. .getAxis, what that's going to do is it's going to come into this menu here where we have access, and it's going to get whichever access we decided we wanted to get, and we chose horizontal as a string because this is the axis that we want to get. What that's basically going to do is it's going to allow you to use like the left and right buttons, the arrow buttons, A and D key, and whatnot. And so that's the component that that's what we're really getting here. There's also basically the same list down here below, but this is specifically for like a joystick and whatnot. So if we wanted to use a joystick, we could actually just use the same name for that, and it will work for like an Xbox controller or a computer controller or something like that. So what I want to do now is I want to do the same thing to get our vertical axis, so we can go move up and down. So we're going to say float vertical equals input dot get axis. And what axis do we want to get? We want to get the vertical axis, just like that. So now what I want to do is I want to create another variable. We're going to call this a vector3, not vector2, and we want vector3. And we're going to call this vector3 movement. And what a vector3 is basically storing kind of like a float here, but it's asking for 3 different numbers instead of just 1. So we're naming this movement because this is what's actually going to tell our player what it wants to do or what to use. So the vector3 that we want to get is we want to call it a new vector3. And what we want to get is we want horizontal as the first number because we're storing the number from the horizontal axis as a variable. The second number, there are 2 ways that we can do this. So what we're looking for is an x, y, and z. There's 2 ways we can do this. We can either do this as, for the second number, as vertical, if I could spell. And we could just leave it at that, and it'll keep our z-axis the same. But what that's going to do, so that's going to move our player on our x and y axis. So, but if you'll notice here in our scene view, the x-axis is good. We want it to be able to move left and right, but our y-axis is actually up and down, which is not necessarily what we want in this particular scene. If you were to not have gravity in here, you wanted to easily, freely move up and down and have our camera facing directly at it or something, for instance, like in a 2D game, that'd be great. But what I want to do is actually I want to go in between here and just say 0 on the y-axis, and then we're going to use vertical on the z-axis, so it moves back and forth. So now what I want to do is I want to say that movement is plus equal to excuse me, no, I want to say our transform dot position, because this is the component that we want to change. If we look on our player over in the inspector at the very top, we have this transform component. So we're getting transform dot position, and then the 3 numbers will be plugged into here like that. So we're gonna say transform position plus equals movement times time dot delta time. And what that's going to do is basically make it so that regardless of what type of machine you're using, whether your machine is pulling 60 frames per second, 90 frames per second, or 30 frames per second, it's going to make it smooth across the entire board. For instance, if you have like a higher frames per second, then everything might seem a little bit slower, because we know that the update function is called once per frame. So it's going to try and call this more times more times per second. So this kind of basically fixes that issue kind of across the board. But what I want to do as well is I want to create a variable to tell this how fast we want to actually move it. So up here at the very top above the start function, I'm going to just create a new basically universal variable up here. We're going to call this a private float speed. And what this private is here is we can either do private or we can do public like this. And the difference between those two is public is going to make it so that any script can basically pull this function from wherever. Private will make it so that it's only can be used within this script, which we really want to do if we're not actually going to use this in other scripts, because it just makes it so that we can't accidentally make a mistake somewhere else and accidentally change this from a different script that we didn't necessarily want to. What I also want to do here is if we just set it to private, we're not going to be able to see it down here in our movement script and change it from here. So what we can actually do to fix that is right above it, we can do these square brackets here. And inside these square brackets, we can just type in serialize field. And what that's going to do is just allow our Unity editor to change that within Unity, but it's still a private variable and no other scripts can change this variable without us wanting it to do it. So now that we have this variable that we can change, we are going to come back down here to where we're changing our position. We're just going to multiply all this by that speed, just like that. So now if we go ahead and save this, wait for it to compile in Unity, you'll see down here in our movement script we now have a speed. It's automatically set to 0. We can change this here however we want to whatever number we want. We can also come up here, and if we want it to be set at a specific speed, we can just say speed equals, let's say, 5f, just like that. And that'll just automatically default it to 5 in our inspector, in our inspector, and it'll give the speed of 5. You could still change it from the inspector. This just gives it kind of a default number, but I'm just going to leave it like that without that 5 in there. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to 5 while we're here. And now if we go ahead and hit play, using the W, A, S, and D keys or the arrow keys, you'll see that our player now moves around our platform. So, and if you can always tweak that speed up a little bit if you want it to move a little bit faster, a little bit slower, however you want to do it. Let's bump this up to 10 just to kind of see what happens. You'll notice he's moving a little bit quicker. And if we put it up to, let's say, 50, he just kind of flies around and he's way too fast. So that's basically how to give just basic movement in Unity. If you enjoyed this tutorial, feel free to like and subscribe. Hit the bell notification button to see when I put out my new videos. And make sure to comment down below. Let me know what you want to see, what types of things you want to learn how to do. I'll do my best to put together a video explaining in as much detail as I can on how to do whatever you guys want me to try and teach. So be sure to click the like and subscribe button, and I will see you next time.